My name's Zalia, and it is awesome today to be able to share the message with you. I was thinking about it earlier, and actually I haven't shared the message since July last year, apart from online. So it's so cool actually seeing a face rather than just a camera with a flashing light. So I hope they're smiley faces this morning, and I'm just glad to be here with you. Have you enjoyed today so far? Yeah, I'm loving the music and the band, so thank you to everyone who's been serving there. This morning, I want to start by sharing a story with you, okay? And it's way back, and I think that there's not even anyone in this building that would have been here at this time, but it was in 1919, okay? So there was two brothers, and they were called Adolf and Rudolph Destler. These guys were shoemakers, and they were great at their job. They started a shoe factory, and a few years later, in 1936, it was the Olympics, and these two brothers decided to design this shoe. It was actually the first track shoe to have a spike on the bottom of it. And the German Olympic team decided to wear their shoes as well as their brand of clothing to the Olympics. And from then on, their company took off. It gave them their big break with these shoes. And so these guys were doing very well until, unfortunately, World War II started. And when World War II started, tensions began to grow between these two brothers. Their wives actually hated each other. The brothers had different opinions, especially around the war and how they felt things should have gone, and they began to drift apart. And at that moment, Rudolph, one of the brothers, was actually drafted to the war. And the other brother, Adolf, was asked to stay and make shoes for everyone in the war. So the story went on, and then Rudolph began to grow jealous. He was away in the war, and he would hear stories of how successful their shoe company, and it was referred to then as his brother's shoe company, was. And so he began to get a bit jealous, and eventually, when he got home from the war, Rudolph decided, I'm going to start my own shoe company, and it's going to be better than the shoes my brother's been making. And he called his shoe company Puma. Have any of you heard of the shoe company Puma? All right, there we go. And he called it that because he thought it was more sporty than the brand they had previously called it. So when this happened, his brother, Adolf, decided, okay, I'm going to rename our previous family business, and I'm going to call my branch of shoes something new. So his name was Adolf. His nickname was Addy. He decided he would call it Addy for his first name and Das for Destler, his last name, and Adidas was born. Do you guys know this story? No, this is pretty cool, hey? Who likes Adidas here? Show of hands. Who likes Puma here? Okay, more Adidas fans. That's cool. I'm an Adidas fan as well. But the craziest thing is, this is how the shoe company started. And these two brothers, actually, from this moment on, for 60 years, they had a feud where they didn't speak to each other at all. In fact, they started their own factories on opposite sides of the river of this small town. And the factories provided most of the jobs for people in these towns. So it caused this big divide in the town, whether you worked for Adidas or Puma. And actually, Adidas said, you're not allowed to speak to anybody who works for the Puma factory. So the rift didn't just affect the brothers, it actually affected everyone in the town. And the crazy thing is that today, Adidas and Puma are two of the three biggest sneaker companies in the whole world. They have billions of dollars, very successful, and yet they couldn't figure out just how to have peace between the brothers. They couldn't figure out how to mend the relationship and have reconciliation. So let me ask you this morning. Who do you currently have conflict with? Think about it. Maybe you two are like these brothers and you have conflict with someone in your family. Maybe it's a sibling. Maybe it's your parents. Maybe you are a parent and you haven't even spoken to one of your children for a long time. Maybe it's one of your work colleagues, someone at school, or a business partner. But today, I want you to think about that person or those people as we can continue to talk together. So there's a comic strip, Peanuts comic strip, and there's Lucy and Charlie Brown. So these two are having a conversation, and Lucy says to Charlie Brown, if I were to change the world, if I were in charge of the world, I'd change everything and I'd start with you. It's pretty brutal, right? But isn't that just like us? We always think we need to change someone else or change something else, but we never think, I'd start with me, right? It's never us. The Beatitudes that we've been looking at over the past few weeks is actually the complete opposite of this. It focuses on ourselves. And in it, Jesus has been saying, actually, I want to start with you. I want to start with me. And he suggests when we do that, that's actually how we'll find happy. That's how we'll live this beautiful life we've been talking about. So today we're going to be speaking about something that I think all of us struggle with, and it's something that is essential for us to be able to find happy. And it's the 7th of the Beatitudes we've been going through. It's in Matthew 5, verse 9, in this famous Sermon on the Mount. And this is actually what it says. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And the thing that I like about this word, peacemaker, is that it actually shows action. And it shows intentionality. It's to make peace, to create peace, not just keep the peace. Any of us can keep the peace by keeping our mouth shut, right? But this is something extra. It's actually going the extra mile and doing something about it. A peacemaker is someone who takes action to repair and restore a relationship, to restore the conflict. If you actually look up the word peacemaker, when Jesus was actually sharing it at this time in the Sermon on the Mount, he was speaking in Hebrew, and the word peace or peacemaker in Hebrew is actually shalom. And shalom peace is more than just a one-word meaning. It has a deep meaning to it. It's actually someone who is actively seeking to reconcile people between each other, but also between people and God, to create peace. So that's a pretty cool word to be called, right? That's peacemaker. That's what it means. So we often think, well, that sounds good, but actually, I don't think I'd be blessed to be a peacemaker. I would be blessed if my opinion was the one that came out on top. I would be blessed if I won that argument, or if I won that fight, or whatever it was, if my word was the final say in the conversation. That's how I'd feel blessed, right? You guys agree? But actually, Jesus says the complete opposite of that. He says a peacemaker is actually not a war maker at all. And you might think, okay, well, sure, maybe I'm not a peacemaker, but I'm definitely not a war maker. But maybe we are without even realizing it sometimes. You know, a war maker is someone who's a fighter, and sometimes I feel like we're more naturally fighters, and we tend to attack and defend, just like in war, right? So we defend by putting up our walls and our boundaries. We do it without even realizing, and it might be like a boss or your partner says to you, hey, can we talk? And then straight away we defend, we start putting our walls up, and we think, all right, what is it this time? What have I done wrong now? And then you start to defend your case, and they haven't even spoken a word yet, and you start planning what you're going to say. And that's actually defensive. That's part of being a war maker, defending. And not only do we stop there, we often then attack as well, right? We're using our words as like manipulation or harsh words to bring someone else down, cut them down. Have you ever heard someone start a conversation and they say something like, did you hear what happened to so-and-so? Or can you believe what happened? Did you hear? And they're not just saying it to share information with you. They're saying it with the intent of like gossip, right? And that exactly is war making. That's how easy it is for us to get sucked in. And Jesus says, hey, that stuff's not going to make you happy at all, talking about someone or gossiping, cutting someone else down. He says, actually, as a Jesus follower, I not only want you guys to be happy, but I want to show you how to attain this happiness, and I believe you'll attain it by being a peacemaker. There's a saying we often say here at Gracegate, and I'm sure you've heard it, especially if you're volunteering and serving in kids' environments or youth groups, and we say that your role as a volunteer is to be the unanxious presence in the room. And I love that because the unanxious presence in the room, you take down the guards of someone who's feeling nervous and anxious for the first time, if they're not sure what to do or whatever. That's our role, right? And I believe that's exactly what it looks like as a peacemaker. So what about you? When you hear the word peacemaker, what do you think of? Who's the most peaceful person you know? Think of them in your mind now, and then think, what would it be like for you and I to be like them? What would you change? Today I want us to explore 4 things that I reckon will help us grow as peacemakers and will help us to become a better version of ourselves, that we can find happy and live this beautiful life. So the first point is this, that I think that peacemakers aren't controlled by anger. And I thought to myself, I don't think that when I was asked to speak on this topic, I thought, man, I don't really want to speak on this topic because I don't get this right every time. I wouldn't say that I'm always a peacemaker. I'm always trying to be, but I think as humans, we often fall short of this. And I think that I'm not here as someone who's consistently achieving this, but actually I rather want to start the conversation together for all of us who are striving to live as peacemakers, because I believe it's the best way for us to be able to live and be happy. So I rather think that as a whole community here, Jesus wants us to be a person out of his own heart, and he himself is a peacemaker, and that's what we're striving for. So peacemakers are not controlled by anger, and it's hard to be a peacemaker and a rage monster at the same time. Would you guys agree? Yeah. And I know this firsthand because I obviously want to be a peacemaker, but sometimes I am definitely not a peacemaker at home, and Wes might have done something that has just really made me angry, and maybe we're having a disagreement or argument, and I really want him to just know how annoyed or angry I am. And I try and express it, but we have a little 1-year-old in the room, so I try and express it peacefully. And have you guys ever tried to yell whisper? When you're like, oh, I'm so angry, but you're just whispering, hoping that the baby won't hear you. Or you try talking angry with a smile on your face, like, you're so annoying right now, and you hope that the baby is just happy with you, right? But it's impossible to be a peacemaker and a rage monster at the same time. So what about you? When was the last time you lost your temper? Notice I didn't say, have you ever lost your temper? Because we're all human and we've definitely all lost our temper. But some of you might be thinking, well, actually, Zalia was on the way to church this morning, just half an hour ago. And I think we've all been there. I'm just really glad Wes and I come to church in different cars these days because of our baby. But losing your temper doesn't lead to feelings of peace, right? You'd all agree with that, but it's normal to get angry. Even Jesus got angry, and that's okay. But the difference is to not hold on to that anger and allow it to cause us to do damage or harm to ourselves or someone else. So in Ephesians 4:26, Paul is writing, and he's one of the authors, and he's writing a letter to a church in Ephesus, and he's giving them instructions, right? And this is what he says. He says, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. In other words, that is not the time to pull out your phone, send that text, send that email, pick up the phone and call that person and tell them exactly what you want to tell them, the peace of your mind. It's not the time to do that when you're angry. And Paul's saying, hey, using those harsh words in that moment of anger, that's the sin he's talking about. He says, in your anger, do not sin. Don't do damage to someone else or yourself. And then he also goes on and he says, do not let the sun go down while you're still angry. And don't hold on to it. Talk it out once you've calmed down and you've had the time you need, and allow room for forgiveness. Imagine if we all did that. Every time we were wronged or in having a disagreement or something, we took the time, and then we'd actually live so much freer, not having to carry that burden into the next day and then add and pile onto it, but we just let it go. I think if we did that every day, it would be one step closer to being a peacemaker. And the verse actually goes on in verse 29. It says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." Basically, it starts with us and how we choose to respond in those moments of anger and when we're the ones being hurt. So think about it now. How are you currently using your words? Reading that, would you say that you are more often building others up or more often tearing people down? The second thing that I think is going to help us become peacemakers and grow as a peacemaker is that if we live in harmony. So peacemakers live in harmony with others. So harmony isn't about just getting along with others. You know, it's more than that. This morning we just had the band up here. They were singing with us. We could hear harmony, right? And harmony is the process of like an individual note or person joined together to make a song sound even better. And I think that it complements each other, and that's what we enjoy about the music. And in Romans 14, verse 19, Paul is writing again. He's writing to a different church in Rome, and this is what he says to them. He says, "So then, let us aim for harmony in the church and try to build each other up." And he's giving these guys the instructions, hey, this is how you guys want to be living. And it's exactly relevant for us today as a church. And basically he's saying that each one of you have different opinions, different skin colors, political views, cultures. We've made different mistakes. We have different ideas on things. But each one of us here in this building, just like the church he was speaking to, we individually come together and have harmony together to walk alongside each other. That's how we're going to be peacemakers living in harmony, bringing our different notes, our different octaves of sounds together to actually join and make one awesome sound together. So there's a story in 1 Samuel 16 and verse 20, and basically there's this guy called David, and he's not at this point a king. You might have heard of King David. We'll speak about him later. But at the moment, his job is actually to serve the current king. So the king was Saul, and Saul was said to be at this time someone who had a tormented soul. So he was this guy that was just distressed, and he was flipping out at everyone. He would lose his temper. He just was a rage monster amongst himself, and everyone in the palace just didn't know what to do with this guy when he was in these moments of absolute distress and despair, like so unhappy in his soul. But then there was David who was serving him, and David found a way to bring peace. He realized that when he would play the harp for King Saul would calm down, and he would actually find peace in himself, and then there would be peace in the palace. And I really like that story because I think that as a Jesus follower, our role is to be a peacemaker, as we've heard. But it's not just about having peace for ourselves. It's actually about bringing peace to other people, like David was doing, bringing peace to the king, which then in turn brought peace to the whole palace, right? To help others reconcile and restore relationships, to help others find forgiveness. And if we can help people by walking alongside them, it won't just be about us, it'll be about other people too. I think imagine if we were a church that brought every different opinion and different note or octave together, that we could come together and have this amazing harmony of peace, that people out in our community knew this place as a place where we were peacemakers who got along in harmony with each other and with our community. So the third thing is to be a peacemaker is peacemakers don't just hope for peace, but they work for peace. I think the difference here is we can just hope for it and sit back, but then there's the action of working for it. And in Hebrews 12 verse 14 it says this, work at living in peace with everyone. And it would be nice if it just said work at living in peace. But then when it says with everyone, that's a bit more confronting because you're like, oh yeah, but Zali, you don't know who's in my flat, or you don't know who I live with at home, or you don't know how toxic my work or my family is. But this is what we're called to do, to work at peace with everybody, because everybody matters to God and therefore they should matter to us. And I think it's this thing of daily working. You can't just do it one day and think, I'm sweet for the rest of the week, because it doesn't work that way. It means that we can't just give up when it's hard. We can't just give up when actually we're angry, or we want to exclude that person because they're different and they're weird, or they don't quite fit in with us, or they've been harsh to us, so I'll be good to everyone except them. But rather, as peacemakers, we're challenged to seek to understand with everyone, to get our hands dirty and to wrestle with the awkwardness or the conflict of what might be happening, and just try and bring about reconciliation, to bring restoration, not just for ourselves, but for others as well. So there's another story in the Bible, and it's found in 1 Kings 4, verse 24, and it's the story of another king, King Solomon. You might have heard of him before, but he's actually a king that was known to have amazing peace and during the whole time he was in reign. So he was someone who brought peace for his palace and the empire at the time, but so much so that neighboring empires and nations, they thought, man, what is it about this King Solomon that he has? Why does he have such peace? And they would actually come to him for counsel and ask him for advice and things like that. And I reckon the reason that he had such peace in his whole nation during his ruling and his reign was because he had peace with God. And he'd figured out because he had peace with God, he could have peace with others as well. I think that because he loved God so much, he began to have the same heart as God. And the more he grew with God, the more he grew as a peacemaker, and the ripple effect went out. It'd be pretty cool if you and I were known for doing the same thing, eh? I think that fighting, drama, division, anger, turmoil, disagreements, that's the theme of most conversations, TV shows, social media posts, or the news these days. But what if the way we lived our life was more like King Solomon, and that we lived in such a way that we created peace with other people? I think that if we had this type of intentionality to choose every day to work at it, we could attain that. And the last of the 4 things that's going to help us grow as peacemakers is that peacemakers are bridge builders. So when some of you think of a peacemaker, you think instantly of someone who's a pushover, right? Of someone who just is quiet and they let their opinions and thoughts get walked over, and that's why they're peacemakers, because they don't stand up for anything. And you think, well, I don't want to be one of those people, so that's not going to be me. I'm not going to just sit back and let my opinions get walked over and sit there and die. But that's actually when we get it totally wrong. Jesus did that exact thing. He laid down his life, his opinions, and his pride for us. You see, Jesus came to earth with just one mission, and his mission was for making peace between God and man. He willingly laid down his life so that we could have connection and peace with God. And Jesus has been doing that from the very beginning, and that's exactly what he still does today. He's given us the opportunity to live in peace with him, sin-free and forgiven. And if we allow him to be part of our lives, he will help restore. He'll be the bridge maker between us and God, and he'll restore where there's been hurt or where we've fallen short or sin. And then he won't stop there, but he'll also, as he becomes part of our lives more, he wants to help us to challenge others, that we can be the peacemaker and the bridge between them and a situation they might be in. So being a bridge maker means that we do our part, basically. We don't just sit there and think, oh, that's a shame, but we actually do something about it. And in Romans 12:18, this is what it has to say. Paul is speaking again to that church in Rome, and this is what he says. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And I really love this part because it's speaking about if it is possible. So basically, you might want to have peace with someone. You've asked for forgiveness with them. You've apologized. You've done part. But, it's not always possible to bring about peace in all situations. But if you've done your part, if it is possible, and then as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And I think so often we think, oh, yeah, well, I would, but they did this or that, or I don't think they want to hear from me, or they don't really deserve it. And we have all these excuses. But as far as it depends on us, we need to do our part to make restoration, to bring peace and live with peace with everyone. There's a story now of David when he was a king. It's in 1 Samuel 25. And there's three people in this story. There's David, Nable, and Abigail. So Nable was known as a rich man. He had a lot of wealth, he had a lot of cattle, he had a lot of people working for him, but he was also known for being really rude and really disrespectful and harsh for his workers and other people that he would do trade and business with. He had a wife called Abigail, and Abigail was the complete opposite of Nable. She was recorded as being sweet and kind and generous, and basically, I think, out of his league. But she was lovely and kind, and then the story goes on. There was David, right? He was king at this time. He was in the wilderness, and Nabal's shepherds had been close to where David was and looking after their sheep, and David made sure that none of the shepherds lost any sheep, that they had everything they needed. He made sure nobody would attack his shepherds or anything like that, even though they weren't his sheep or anything. So King David had been kind and respectful to them, and then they were in the wilderness doing some work, and he realizes, man, we really need some supplies for our men. So he asks his men, can you go to the farm of Nable? It's not far from here. Can you treat him with kindness and respect? Greet him from King David and say, hey, I've looked after your shepherds. We hear you're doing well. We hope you live long and prosper. And we're wondering if you could give us some of your supplies for me and my men. So off David's men went to go and to ask for this. And they do. They do exactly what they're supposed to. They share the message and they say it in kind words, and they're kind to him. And then Nable, he responds like this. He responds harsh. He says, who even is King David? I don't even know him. Why would I give my meat and my food to someone I don't even know? And how dare you guys waste my time by coming and speaking to me? And he actually asks them to leave and doesn't give them anything. So they go back to David and they say, hey, King, we asked what you said. We spoke like you said. And this is what he had to say. And David was furious. He was so annoyed that someone would speak like that to his men, but to him, king. So he decides, hey guys, get your swords. We're going to go seek revenge. So they start getting ready to go and bring revenge on Nable. And at that time, one of Nable's workers goes to his wife and says, I don't know if you heard, but this is how your husband spoke to King David's men. And she was ashamed. She was saddened that they spoke that way, but she was also fearful because she knew that this was a king that they'd disrespected, right? So she knew that this could basically mean off with your head. So she decided to take matters into her own hands as, I believe, a bridge builder, a peacemaker. So she collected all the food and cattle and all the water and extra supplies that they would have needed. She took some men and the donkeys and actually made her way to David herself. So David and his men are storming through the desert, full of rage and anger at this time of the disrespect. They had their swords ready to bring revenge, and then they meet Abigail in the wilderness. And Abigail hops off her donkey, bows down before David and says, please forgive my husband, how harshly he's spoken. Please accept my apology on his behalf and accept all these gifts and supplies. And David actually in the end ends up thanking God. When he calms down, he actually thanks God for sending Abigail to help him come out of his moment of anger, and he accepts her apology, brings peace, responds with peace, and goes back home. I think it's such a cool story because Abigail had two options, right? She could have just agreed with her husband or pretended she didn't know anything about it. She could have been a peacekeeper by not saying anything. But she actually decided to be a peacemaker by doing something, and then actually being a bridge builder by actually going and filling in the gap between, right, bringing peace. And because she decided to do that, it saved many people's lives. And I think that the coolest thing is that often we're called to be an Abigail, to stand in the gap for somebody else, to bring peace, even when it doesn't really have anything to do with us. And I think that when we do that, that's when we're going to be peacemakers. So this seventh beatitude we've been talking about has the two halves, and that was the blessed are the peacemakers. But then it says, for they will be called children of God. So a year ago, 16 months ago, we had our little girl Harper. And when she was born, some people were like, oh, she looks so much like Wes. And then they'd say, oh, she looks exactly like you. And then the next day they'd change their mind and it would just go between who exactly she looked like. We didn't really know. She just looked squishy and red to us. But now that she's grown up a bit, she's started to look like way more like us, right? And now she's got her little personality, and that's even more like us. And she's totally, people can tell, oh, she's definitely your daughter, and sometimes not for a good thing. But that's exactly, she started to grow into becoming our daughter, that others can now see it as well. But I think the same is true in this verse when Jesus is speaking and he says, for they will be called children of God. You see, the more time we spend with Jesus, just in his word and prayer with him, getting to know him, speaking to people about him, the more that he actually begins to create transformation in our lives, the more we begin to know his character. We know what he loves. We know the way he treats people, and we start to do the same thing, right? We grow and become more like him. I think that loving God and getting to know him just starts to flow through us, and that's how people know that we'll be called a child of God. You see, God is referred to as a God of peace. Jesus has said that he was the Prince of Peace. We don't have to earn our way to become a child of God. Harper doesn't have to earn her way to become our child. We already knew that from the beginning before she even did anything. It's the exact same for God. Sometimes we might get sucked into this concept or this idea that we'll become a child of God if we do da-da-da-da-da and earn it. But he just calls us a child of God, and he says that, hey, you only have to do one thing to become a child of God, and that is believe and accept me. In fact, in Romans 10 verse 9, it says this, confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, and you will be saved. That's it. It's that simple and easy. It has nothing to do with the way you dress or what job you have or how good you are at serving the needy and the poor and how many people see you do it, or how good you are at praying or anything like that. It's just this. Confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, and you will be saved. The more time we spend with him, the more he has time to transform our hearts, to transform our actions, especially in those moments of anger when we're defending or attacking. The more time that we can actually become like him and become a child of God that's a peacemaker, not just between us and God, but between others as well. I think that as a church, it would be awesome if we were living in harmony, that we be a peacemaker that isn't controlled by anger, that we live in harmony with each other in such a way that makes this beautiful sound that our community wants to hear and be a part of, that we work for peace, that we don't just sit there and hope it happens, but we get our hands dirty, we have awkward and uncomfortable conversations, and we do something about it. And then lastly, that we stand in the gap between God and others who don't know him yet, and we share his love with them in a peaceful way. Let us pray. God, we're so grateful that you use ordinary people like us, like David playing the harp to bring peace, or like Abigail standing in the gap and sharing what she thought was right. God, we just ask that you help us to be a church that is full of peacemakers, that it isn't just here in this building while we meet together, but in our own homes, in our families, in our universities, jobs, sports teams, wherever we are, that we can bring peace that isn't from us, but that can only be from you. And we're grateful that you use people like us and what you're already doing in this community, and we're excited for what's next. Amen.